It began with fear carried on the wind. In the first weeks of August 2021, Kabul's streets hummed with rumors more persistent than traffic noise. Provinces were falling in rapid succession, garrisons surrendering without shots, and whole Afghan army units dissolving overnight. What had seemed unthinkable months before, that the Taliban might take back the capital in a matter of days, now felt inevitable. Vendors whispered over half-empty stalls. Bank lines snaked down streets. Families sold furniture, cars, even wedding jewelry to buy passage on the last available flights. The question was not if the Taliban would arrive, but when. This collapse had roots months earlier. In February 2020, the United States signed the Doha Agreement, pledging to withdraw its troops in exchange for Taliban promises of peace talks and restraint. For Afghans, the deal was unsettling. The government in Kabul had been excluded from the talks. Morale in the army plummeted. Soldiers understood that America's exit meant their supply lines, paychecks, and air support would falter. President Joe Biden's April 2021 announcement fixed a final date, September 11th, later moved to August 31st for the last U.S. troops to leave. The Taliban read it as a clock winding down in their favor. Across the countryside, Taliban fighters advanced in a blitz. They captured provincial capitals, often without firing a shot, as governors negotiated their own surrenders. U.S. supplied Humvees, weapons, and ammunition flowed into Taliban hands. By the second week of August, Kandahar and Herat had fallen. Ghazni toppled. Then Mazar-e-Sharif. Within 11 days, the Afghan National Army, a force Washington had claimed was 300,000 strong, simply collapsed. In Kabul, President Ashraf Ghani insisted the city was safe. He appeared on television with a stern face, urging citizens to trust the government. Behind palace doors, he was making preparations to leave. Diplomats in embassies nearby shredded files, burned documents, and lowered flags. Helicopters ferried staff to the airport. Afghans who had worked as translators, drivers, cooks, and clerks for the coalition rushed to complete visa applications. They knew what was coming: reprisal. On the morning of August 15th, the dam broke. Taliban fighters swept into Kabul, facing little resistance. Ghani fled the country, later surfacing in the United Arab Emirates. Police melted away. Soldiers shed their uniforms. By nightfall, armed Taliban were seated in the presidential palace, taking photographs behind Ghani's desk. The city had fallen without a pitched battle. The true struggle shifted to Hamid Karzai International Airport. Tens of thousands of Afghans surged toward its gates. American Marines, paratroopers, and British troops flew in to secure a perimeter, stringing razor wire and manning checkpoints. Families pressed against fences, waving documents, holding infants high in the air. Some tried to climb walls. Others clawed at the gates, begging to be let inside. In scenes that shocked the world, men clung to the wheel wells of departing C-17 transport planes. Some fell to their deaths as the aircraft climbed. Inside the wire, chaos reigned. Evacuation lists circulated, meant to prioritize interpreters, embassy staff, and those with visas. But the lists were confusing, incomplete, sometimes contradictory. American soldiers fired warning shots to disperse crowds. Afghan families spent nights outside the gates in dust and sewage, clutching paperwork, hoping their names would be called. Marines distributed bottled water, tried to calm crying children, and endured insults from desperate crowds who felt abandoned. The Taliban established checkpoints around the city. At first, they allowed some passage. Later, reports spread of beatings, confiscated passports, and shots fired overhead. Many Afghans who had been promised escape were trapped outside the gates. The fear wasn't only of violence, it was of a life erased. Girls pulled from classrooms, women stripped of jobs, journalists silenced, musicians forced into hiding. Those who remembered Taliban rule in the 1990s recognized the pattern immediately. Those too young to remember learned it in days. The evacuation became one of the largest airlifts in history. Over 120,000 people were flown out in just 2 weeks. Each day, massive C-17s lifted off, their bellies filled with families sitting shoulder to shoulder on bare metal floors. But the scale masked the omissions. Tens of thousands who had worked with coalition forces were left behind. For them, the gates closed on a promise unfulfilled. Then came the bloodiest day. On August 26th, a suicide bomber from ISIS-K slipped into the crowd at Abbey Gate. The explosion tore through Afghan civilians and U.S. troops. 13 American service members died, along with more than 170 Afghans. Marines who had been handing out water moments before were carrying bodies. The attack turned desperation into horror. Even then, the evacuation continued, because there was no choice. On August 30th, at 11:59 p.m., the last American C-17 roared into the night sky. Major General Chris Donahue, the final soldier to board, became the last American to leave Afghanistan. Gunfire and fireworks erupted across Kabul as the Taliban celebrated victory. For the United States, the longest war in its history was over. For Afghans, a new era had begun, one that felt like the past returning. The aftermath was stark. Ministries dedicated to women's affairs were shuttered. Murals painted in hopeful colors were covered with black and white slogans. Girls were barred from secondary schools. Women, judges, and journalists fled or went underground. Reports of executions and disappearances surfaced. The economy collapsed as foreign aid froze. Lines at banks grew longer. Hunger spread. Kabul grew quieter, not from peace, but from fear. Internationally, the images seared into memory. Helicopters lifting from embassy rooftops, desperate crowds chasing aircraft, a baby handed over razor wire, gunfire echoing as the last plane departed. Commentators drew comparisons to Saigon in 1975. Critics asked how 20 years of investment had unraveled in 11 days. Was it inevitable, or was it a failure of vision, planning, and resolve? For Americans, the debate continues about wasted treasure, wasted lives, and the meaning of an endless war. For Afghans, the debate is irrelevant. Their reality is daily life under the same rulers they had fought for 2 decades. The fall of Kabul is not just history. It is a wound still open, a reminder of promises broken and futures stolen. The last memories are haunting. Crowds pressed at gates, mothers pushing babies forward, Marines sweating in the dust, the sound of a final jet taking off into a dark sky. An era ended in silence and smoke. The war was over. The consequences were not. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.